Thanks, guys. First, allow me to congratulate you for staying in the room after a technical talk. I was chatting with some of the people up front. This is a systemic problem in our industry, is that we keep on deep diving into the technical world and we're not reaching across the aisle, and we keep on finding ourselves in continued problems. And I hope that you'll take a little bit from this and learn how you can be part of the solution, right? So I'm John Dwyer, so I'm the Director of Security Research at Binary Defense. I run this thing called ARC Labs, where we do adversarial research, and then we try to build tools and capabilities to detect and respond to those type of things. There's all my social media stuff if you want to. We put out like blogs and how-to videos if you want to get like into malware analysis. I got a whole video series to take you through step by step on how you can kind of do that. I actually got started in my security career. My buddy Toby's here. We both worked when I was at school at Carnegie Mellon. I worked at the SEI and then got exposed to CERT. And then from there was a whirlwind. I did research and development, reverse engineering, incident response consulting, which was, you know, the hardest time of my life, but I also learned a ton. And then I was building up threat hunting teams all over the world. And through all that experience, I learned, you know, two main things. One, I don't have all the answers. There's like this weird arc that you go through, or at least I went through in your security career. Like first, you start as this total noob, you don't know anything, you're drinking from a fire hose and you're drowning. And then you learn a little bit, and then you go into what I like to call the black and white era, where you have created all of these security hills that you're willing to die on. And then you, as you learn more, you get to this stage where you're like, I don't have all the answers, you've made a ton of mistakes, and you know enough to know that you got a lot to learn, right? So everything I say, there's always a different opinion, and there's different ways to interpret that, but I think that that is one of the main things you can take away with this in terms of communication skills. Because what I see across the industry is that we have like the businesses over here, and they do stuff, and then you have security over here responding to what they do, right? And that is from a lack of communication across the business units. What you can do in terms of your career, like not like this career advice is kind of ancillary to like actually securing our organizations, but from a career point of view, attaining this skill has done remarkable things for me. Does anyone speak two languages in the room? You speak two languages. You can tell me that this is true. If you are standing in between two groups that speak your two different languages, it is your responsibility to communicate across the medium in which they understand, correct? You also become the most important person in that conversation. And then the success of that conversation comes down to your ability to communicate. It is no different in cybersecurity. If you want a seat at that table, if you want to elevate your career, be involved in all these amazing things, you have to learn how to communicate across technical and non-technical teams. It also has the benefit of like making sure that your company doesn't get popped at the end of the day, right? So this is a win-win, and I cannot recommend it. I'm on this like rampage of doing talks about this right now, and I'm like trying to gauge how many people actually stick around, because I'm telling you, I've been around the block more than a few times, and we don't have enough people that have this bilingual skill, and that's why we keep on finding ourselves in these holes, right? So here's what I don't think everyone understands, and I hope you guys appreciate my Eras Tour memes here. This may be a little bit inflammatory, but I actually do believe this, but ransomware has done more for cybersecurity than probably anyone in this room. And that's not to disparage anyone's work or like how smart you are or anything. But what ransomware did that we couldn't do was effectively communicate and quantify the risk based on a threat. And what you see after that is a massive investment from ransomware, right? So they did it. They did it because they went to the business people and they put them in their face and it says, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're going to lose billions of dollars. And we did it, right? We actually did it. We made things actually better, and people are having more communications, and security, something that we talk about all the time. Now, the bad news is ransomware was successful based on all the stuff we were talking about for the previous 15 to 20 years. It didn't do anything different than what we were doing in the carding era. Does anyone work incident response in like 2010s? Yeah? Framework POS, right? Point of sale system attacks, stealing credit cards. You guys remember when Target got popped, Home Depot? Fun fact, if you go and Google in 2014, the Sands Casino got taken down. It was politically motivated, but if you look at the technical details of that, same attack path as a ransomware attack in 2018. They took advantage of everything we were talking about. Admin rights, domain admins logging onto workstations, SMB open from our endpoints, and they did it, right? But we all knew that it was a problem. We couldn't make the change and ransomware did it, right? So all of those actors in the carding era, they just moved over to ransomware, carried out the same attack, and made tons and tons of money. So we have to understand that this isn't a problem with them not caring or being too dumb or being noobs or any of that thing. It's a problem that we did not effectively communicate a problem and get buy-in, right, to do these kind of things to avoid it. So, like, that's a hard truth, and we can't make that mistake again, and we also can't waste this opportunity. You know, we are in a time of opportunity for security where we can actually quantify risk by dollar amount and then actually make change. Before, I spent about 7 years at IBM, like I was at X-Force doing research, and we were able to calculate that the average cost of a data breach, which is a fantastic report, it comes out every year. So now it's $4.5 million per breach, right? That's a great data point to bring up to your board and your executives, right? I can spend $250,000 on security. We have now potentially saved $4.5 million, right? So this is where another point, hard truths. Hard truths we're going to go to. I'm going to start with what we need to do to meet them halfway, and then we're going to talk about how we communicate with business leaders. When I go to companies all over the world and I ask them, what is your detection and response strategy? The first thing most people do is start naming tools. They say, we got this fancy whiz-bang EDR and this SOAR and this SIM, and then we're always striving towards 100% MITRE attack coverage, right? Guys, like, tools and a spreadsheet from MITRE is not a strategy. Those are components of a strategy, but they're not a strategy. And we end up playing this. There's so many companies out there, and I'm not talking down to anyone, but this is like part of, like, we need to do a paradigm shift in our head about what strategic thinking is versus what implementation. There's so many out there that they download their little Excel sheet and then they go and they're like, we're going to make it green, right? They have the red, yellow, green stoplight chart on MITRE attack. I have worked incidents in which they had a wicked green spreadsheet and they still got popped, right? So when you do this, what you do is you end up spinning circles because you end up creating detections that are really weak. They have no context behind it. You're triaging more alerts, and you have done nothing to demonstrate how you've reduced risk. Meanwhile, if you take a look at this is a very easy, understand way to depict a strategy, right? We have our Venn diagram there of attacker operations, impact, and exposure. And right in the middle there is everything that we're going to focus on. This is the driving principle behind how we develop a detection and response strategy. Attacker operations. We live in the time of commodity cybercrime. Most of these attacks are remarkably well understood. There's not a lot of innovation in terms of like how the attack happens after the fact. There's innovation in initial access, vulnerability exploits, and social engineering. But there's not a lot of innovation after post-exploitation, right? So we have a really good understanding of how attackers operate. Impact, how bad is it if this attack happened? How bad would it be? Can we tie that to dollar cents? Can we tie that to a business line? And exposure is, what is the likelihood of that attack succeeding based on our controls that are in place? It's not always, maybe exposure is, see, like I make mistakes. Maybe exposure isn't the great word because immediately people think about like RDP hanging out on the internet. But It could be internal. Well, how exposed are you to a particular threat if someone gets domain admin on one of your boxes, right? What is my blast radius there? Now that's a strategy. Tangentially, if you guys haven't seen me talk before, we're going all over the map. There's a better than good chance that I don't make it through all my slides, and that's completely fine. I've been using this analogy for a long time when you talk about like attacker operations and where this can be used also strategize on whose roles and responsibilities are for your detection and response strategy, like where do your service providers fit in? You guys ever been to Chicago and seen the bean? You know, the big reflective bean? All right, I'm gonna try this metaphor again. It has not landed before, but I think I got a new way to, because I do think it's a good way to interpret the threat landscape. So if you are standing at any point by the bean, what you see in the reflection is different. I could be standing 3 feet away from you. What I see in that bean is manifested differently. I still see the same stuff. Some buildings are bigger, some trees are smaller, depending on where I'm standing. The threat landscape would be like your third party. What we have is a great unique insight in which we can look across all industries, all companies, and tell you what's behind you, right? On the landscape, okay? So you have your provider here. They have a purview across many different spaces, and they can tell you what's behind you. But there's no third-party person. I can't come into your network and tell you more about your network, right? That is where your specialty, if you're doing internal security, I should say. No one's going to tell you. That's really where your value is. Your value is that you can perceive the threat landscape based on your perspective on the bean. And that is your slice of the threat landscape. Everyone is just a little bit different. Everyone's got different stuff, different configurations, different things that are important. And you need to be able to understand your slice of it to properly implement something like this, right? And that's a strategy, right? So we're going to try to interpret the threat landscape based on the data that we get on how it applies to us. Here's an example of how we could use this framework. The MFT stuff. Hopefully none of your organizations got popped by it. That sucked. Here's the thing though, is like no one was talking about MFTs before they got popped all over the place. You know, like I knew that they were a thing, but it wasn't like we were sitting here saying, here's your crown jewel, your MFT, right? We knew what they were, they knew that people had them, but it was like we all took one on the chin whenever that 0 day came out, and they ran off to the, also, another tangent, guys. If you, we have a problem with misclassifying these types of attacks as ransomware versus data theft. Like they're both extortion-based attacks. This one was attributed to Klopp, who has done ransomware, but there was no ransomware in MoveIt, so we have to think that as a data theft. And that's an important data point whenever you read stuff and interpret it, when you're building stats about what's most likely to happen. Data theft, not ransomware, okay? So let's take our strategy here and say attacker ops, right? So data theft, ransomware, attacker, these are generally the steps, okay? They don't all have to occur in this order. They don't all need to be there. But this is generally the attacker operation for ransomware and data theft. And it hasn't really changed since 2018, guys. So like if you think about what MFT does, is it allows them to skip all the way to there and extract data, right? So this fits right in line with their operations. We should have known about it. Why didn't we know about that? Why weren't everyone thinking about it? If we think about impact, if you know what the type of data that MFTs usually have in them, they are designed to communicate across many different businesses. A lot of people use it to handle sales orders, accounts payable. Manufacturing uses it to make sure to distribute orders go to different places. A lot of account information and financial records are transacted through MFT. That was the whole point of MFTs. Before MFTs, Doug, you remember this, people used to spin up FTP servers everywhere. And they were totally unmanaged and they were just hanging out there. And then the MFT market spun up and they're like, no, we're going to take all that stuff, condense them down into a single enterprise solution, Now we have MFTs, which is good. This is actually good, right? But this wasn't ever bubbled up to like a cyber key terrain piece. And if you think about the exposure piece, is that they're designed to hang out on the internet, right? So they are designed to be exposed because they're supposed to do communication between 3 different companies. Now, if we take our strategy there, this bubbles to the top, right? If we use MITRE ATT&CK and we're just chasing down the stuff that we have on Twitter, we're probably not going to care about MFTs. We're probably not going to highlight it, and that's probably what happened. You know, I wasn't paying attention to it. I'll own that. I wasn't sitting out there and telling everyone to secure their MFTs or watch their MFTs, is because we weren't thinking properly about how to really contextualize the threat landscape in terms of like what's important to the attackers and what do they consider success. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So, what can you get from attacker operations if you go back and you look at all the mass exploitation events that we've gone through over the last 5 or 6 years? Proxy shell, proxy logon, log4j, any of them, MFT, or the move it one. And then I think this one, yeah, that's a NetScaler one. So that was a NetScaler gateway, came out. The vulnerability changed, the exploit changed, the technique in which they implemented that exploit changed, but what the attacker did after did not change. They do the same, I almost swore, same stuff, you guys, is they put a web shell, they steal data, they create an account, they launch some living off the land post-exploitation command to pop a shell. Like, that's what they do every single time. So why are we waiting for a 0-day to come out, and instead, why aren't we saying, I want a detection every time a script file is written to the web-enabled directory. I want to look for that web-enabled process spawning a command interpreter, right? So w3 wp.exe, if it spawns CMD, PowerShell, WMIC, run DLL 32, you would have caught move it, right? You would have caught the unauthenticated bypass, right? So why are we waiting for this stuff to happen? And it's because we aren't properly designing a strategy and we have to design a strategy before we can communicate to business, before the business invests in security. Oh, final point. I'm almost skipped this, and it's probably the most important part. So the techniques change, and they do change often, but goals and the objectives don't, right? If you think back to like, those don't change all that often, and that's the stuff we should be looking for. When attackers change their goals and the objectives, that's where we see monumental shift in the threat landscape. Ransomware, that was a shift in an objective. They shift from stealing credit card data to trying to do operational disruption. You know, the initial access brokers used to be banking Trojans. They shift their goal and objective to providing access to ransomware operators, and the whole world burned to the ground. Right, so instead of like, we can always use the attacker goals and the objectives to be our driving light to our detection and response strategy. And also, like, think about how many of you guys get asked questions about what AI is going to do, like how are attackers going to use AI, right? And everyone what's the first thing everyone says? Attackers are going to use AI to do what? I think we just heard it in the last talk, actually. Phishing, write emails. Okay. Let's assume, if they're using, you know, the Terminator to write a phishing email, did the goals and the objectives change? No. So our strategy doesn't change. Our scale changes, but bad news, guys, we've already been in the era of phishing scale for 10 years. Billions and billions and billions of more phishing emails are sent every year. So that's our reality already. So don't, like, when you have that in your back pocket, they say, like, I don't care if a computer wrote a phishing email or a human wrote a phishing email, still a phishing email. It doesn't bypass the rest of your detection and response strategy, because we can go back to our attacker operations and say, okay, they write the best phishing email on earth, everyone clicks on it, they pop a shell. Okay, we still know how to detect that. They still have to go through the rest of those stages, so our strategy remains the same. And so I'm not going to waste time worrying about Terminator writing emails, right? If you don't have this buttoned up and you can't argue it or talk to a business leader about it, you're going to get sent down a rabbit hole that's going to take you away from stuff that actually matters. So, sorry, another tangent, but I get asked about AI all the time. So just saying, when you use this, we can take the whole 98% of the threat landscape and boil it down to this. Really, if we use the goals and the objectives of criminals to define our strategies, basically this, most of the time. It's this covers quite a bit. And the good news is if you get buttoned up on these, it actually mitigates a lot of other threats. This is something you could take to a non-technical person and describe the threat landscape. You take a MITRE attack dump and you show it to a chairman of the board, you might as well be speaking Klingon. They're never going to get it. They're going to turn off, disengage, and then you get in that environment where it's that's security's problem, and then the only time that you get to talk to them when something bad happens. And that's not where we want to be. You want a seat at the table. You get a seat at the table by being able to communicate this effectively and saying all those technical stuff you read on Twitter, all that kind of stuff, okay, where does that fall into the goals and the objectives of the threat landscape? Do I need to amend this? Do I need to change this? Or are they still trying to extort me? They're still trying to commit financial fraud, or still trying to steal our resources to mine Bitcoin? Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. This is the GOS model, though. You guys know that? Goals, objectives, strategy, and tactics. If you guys ever come across this, if not, you really should, because business people know this. Business people understand goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics. If you can communicate on this language, they'll be able to understand what you're saying. And that moves you in the right direction to being able to have an effective communication and get investment, get headcount, get all the stuff that you need, right? Okay, well, that's just half the story, right? Why we need business leaders in this. We try to do that alone, you're going to fail. Unless you are in those meetings making strategic decisions of what your company is doing, and you try to measure impact on your own, it's not going to go well, right? You need the business leaders to tell you what they're trying to do in the next 3, 5, 10 years, what strategic moves they're trying to take the business for you to be able to measure impact. With that information, now you can calculate and quantify what percentage of risk you have, and that's the conversation that they want to have. When I see stuff like this, I can't help but think that there was a communication breakdown. Anyone try to buy a car while CDK was down? Did you guys hear about that? It's pretty bad, right? It was a single point of failure. One application controlled the ability for thousands and thousands of dealerships to actually sell cars. There was a single point of failure. Change Healthcare, same thing. Henry Schein, same thing. We already talked about Move It a little bit. When this stuff happens, that means that I can't help but think that there was a communication breakdown where there wasn't a useful conversation about how we're architecting something based on what we know adversaries are doing. Because I can tell you this right now, while ransomware and extortion-based threat actors aren't really changing their tactics, the one thing that they are getting a lot better at is being able to identify levers of pressure within your organization. For many, many years, we used to track FinServ, financial services, as the #1 quote-unquote targeted, don't kill me for using that word, but impacted industry. And then it, switched over to manufacturing whenever extortion-based attacks really took hold, right? Anyone work in manufacturing, OT, oil and gas, or anything like that? Yeah? Oh, we've already talked. Hey, man, it's good to see you. Yeah. So we've already talked about this before, but there's not, and he'll affirm me here. There's not a line manager on earth that doesn't know down to the second how much money a company will lose if that line stops, right? That is a huge element of pressure. That takes it down to, do I pay a ransom or do I don't, to a financial-based decision. And that's what they want to get it to, right? So we have to preemptively identify those elements of pressure so that we can properly be able to detect, contain, and respond to it, right? Does that make sense? We need them. Like, we need the business people. You're never going to know what the business people are doing, what they're investing in, unless you talk to them. And you got to talk to them the right way. Take this, for example. So here is a GOS model for a real estate company that I, aka ChatGPT, wrote. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to gain market share by going after young buyers by doing an all online thing, right? They're going to do everything online. You'll be able to do all of your business, document transactions, buy your house, sell your house through an online system. Okay? Now, I've been in many, many meetings here where the first thing that security person says whenever they say they're going to do, online digital document management, they're going to do transactions online that may require email, right? Because it's what third party, if you guys buy a house, like stuff happens over emails. Not everyone's going to be a member of your portal. You're going to email stuff back and forth. A lot of the time, security people, the first thing they say is, we can't do that. We won't do that, right? We won't do that because of the risk. Now imagine what happens then. The company is going to shut you out. They're doing that because they look and they're like, this is our financial future. We have $60, $70 million. And you're like, well, I tried. And then you throw your hands up and then you don't. You're like, these idiots don't know anything about security. That happens. It happens a lot. I've seen it so many times. Think about how much different that conversation happens if you look at one of the objectives there at the top. It says, build trust with potential buyers, right? Think about how different that conversation says. I notice that one of your objectives is to build trust. Imagine how we could highlight that as a market separator if we implement X, Y, and Z as part of our detection strategy. Now we can say that this is something that we do that our competitors don't, and now we're aligned with what the business wants to do. You still get to do your security stuff, but now you have buy-in because you're tying it to how the company can actually obtain their objectives. That's a whole different conversation. And that's really what we need to get to. When you do that, you will get buy-in because now you become part of the solution to them achieving their goal. Make more money. Business people love money. We love money too, though, because that's going to get investment. It's going to head count. How many of you guys? How many of you guys work internal security? How many people do you wish you could hire? You don't have enough head count. No one. No one does, right? No one does. And that's because we're not tying ourselves to money. Instead, we're saying, everyone's always heard that thing about oh, security's just a cost center. You're just a drain on it. You can flip that and say, this is a market separator for us. We do X, Y, and Z, right? We highlight this. We bubble security to the front of it, and we have our security people out there talking at conferences about all the cool stuff that you guys are doing, right? You're doing all these implementations that directly align with the threat landscape. You're pushing the envelope. You're on the bleeding edge of technology. Your name gets out there, and now you drive more business to the company. That's a lot cooler than just saying, I tried. This is what I'm talking about, guys. And I don't know if I'm going to be successful on this push to try to change the mindset of security people because we don't like to be told what to do. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying that this does work. I've done this. I've sat on the table with a lot of boards after an incident and really been able to talk through how to incorporate their security team into their strategy to now tie it to revenue, right? And that's what we really need to do, and that's what being bilingual is all about. It's being able to understand this and say, first you got to talk to them and be nice, and then you get a seat at the table where you get to see this kind of stuff. And now you can go through there and you can kind of highlight some of the things that would be, what is some of the stuff that aligns with the threat landscape? Well, we see email in there. We see a SaaS application, okay. That aligns with maybe some crypto jacking and some business email compromise. We'll have private data, so we got to be concerned about data theft and database extortion. if we're going all SaaS, then maybe we put ransomware at the bottom because it still remains a highly Windows-centric sort of attack. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a triage, and now I can provide some insight into where I can strategically have a conversation about how we can help them be better at achieving this goal. It's even better when you can quantify it. So, in 2016, 17, there's this Austrian company, FACC. And this little box here is the stock price after they had that BEC attack. Then the CEO and the CFO both got fired. You're talking about quantifying a risk to a business leader. This is the kind of stuff. It's not the boogeyman. It's like, if you don't do this, all this, the world's going to collapse and we're going to be out of jobs. That's a conversation you can have. Let me tie a dollar amount to it. Let me tie it to someone's job. Now that's a good one. It's even better when you find it in the business vertical. A lot of these examples are out there. And being able to have this and bring this to say, this is our strategy, this is why we need to do it, and let me assign a dollar amount to that in terms of a risk calculation, and this is what we can do to help you gain market share if we do X, Y, and Z, because you will gain trust. Congratulations, you just became bilingual, right? You're talking in a manner in which they have. You're presenting it in easy to understand. We don't need to, I haven't mentioned really anything technical yet. You guys all understand what I'm trying to say, right? And you guys are all technical people. Anyone not technical in here? Oh, you bunch of nerds. I would really love if there was like a CEO in here who had never like touched a computer before. I'd be like, oh, that makes sense. I should have planted one. Next time. Okay. So how can we present this in a way in which we can now prioritize together with our business teams, right? So I've already talked this together. We can tie an impact, the supporting technology behind it, and this is the last piece to it. Anyone if you were in the military before, you guys ever heard the term mission mapping? So mission mapping, for those who don't know, is if you have a mission, and you map it down to the people, processes, and technologies in which that support that for you to obtain your mission, right? This is not easy to do, but if it's part of your detection and response strategy and you get buy-in from your company, you'll find that you'll get investment to start doing that. So if I got to think about how do I align a threat to a target technology, what is the outcome of this happening? And I've definitely boiled this down way simpler than it actually is, so don't crucify me. But you can take this exercise out and start mapping this to technologies and processes that enable that attack to be successful. Remember goals and the objectives. And then tie that to the technology that supports the goals and the objectives of the business. And now we have a direct one-to-one relationship between that. You show that, right? That's a productive conversation. And you say, well, we don't need to do everything, right? Because no one's ever going to have everything. Everyone's working within budgets. And what the last thing you want to do as a security person is waste money, right? Because you never get that money back. Budgets only go down if you can't properly articulate what we're going to talk about at the end. So we tied this down, and we're like, okay, we can do this. Here's our strategy mapped out in a very easy to understand quad chart that business people understand. And if we take those supporting technologies that we just talked about, I threw a couple different examples in there. We have our goals and the objectives based on the threat landscape. We have our impact and exposure. And in the top right, we can bubble technologies to the top. My man. You can have this conversation with someone and they'll be like, okay, top right, I get that. I get a quad chart. We're prioritizing this, and it's justified based on risk to the business and the risk from the threat. Okay, what do you need to do that? Right? Let's say they choose BEC. I wouldn't hate them for that. I think that's not a bad thing. And this is where we can miter out, you guys. We can get into the tactics. I'm 40-something minutes here, and this is the first time I'm showing something technical, really, is now we can start tying this to. We can start saying, okay, now how do we implement our security strategy? Go ahead, use MITRE. Knock yourself out. I think it's great. It's probably one of the best security products the last 10 years. But we got to know how to use it right. We can't play MITRE ATT&CK bingo. We have to use it what it's supposed to do, and that's bring context to an attack or operation, right? So I don't need to know every single command living off the LAN tool or command interpreter out there. I just say T1028, right? And now I know what that is. And now I have some context behind what our detection is for whatever it is that we're doing. That's the right way to do it, in my opinion, because like I said, I've been wrong more times than probably anyone in this room, but that's my opinion on how to properly use it. And this actually makes sense and fits into our overall strategy. And finally, what this does, if you do something like this, how much more secure are we? The golden goose of metrics that people have been asking, right? It's really hard to do unless, everyone, if you've been scrolling TikTok for the last 40 minutes, stop for 30 seconds and pay attention to this. This is massively important. Without a defined threat, there is no meaningful security metric that you can derive. Otherwise, you're just grasping at straws. You must define a specific threat to develop a meaningful metric to answer that question, right? Please understand that. I've been talking to people for so many years about that, where they get asked this question about, well, how much more secure are we? Can you tell us how much more secure are we? From what? From asteroids? From ninjas? Like, what are we talking about here? You got to know what's relevant to you, and then you can measure how much more secure are you. What is our level of risk based on our exposure and how the attackers operate, right? All I'm saying, guys, is like, I'm not saying I have it all figured out. But what I'm saying is that the stakes are far too high for us to just sit in the corner and complain about the business not caring about security. Is that we can actually move the needle in terms of reduction of risk. You know, this cyber kinetic line that we have right now is becoming more and more gray. You guys remember, like, when we didn't have any toilet paper during the pandemic? Yeah. What people don't realize is, like, during that time, the adversaries were hyper aware of how fragile our supply chain was. And we responded to so many attacks in the trucking industry during that time. Like, you don't even know how close everyone was to not having food at your grocery stores, right? So the stakes are far too high for us to not take the 5 hours it is a week to have a meaningful conversation with the business, because that's not their job, right? Like, we always, the thing that kind of like pisses me off is that, like, whenever people talk about, like, Susie in accounting clicked on a phishing email, like, what an idiot. Like, and security is a shared responsibility. Well, you know, we have a responsibility too. In security, we have a responsibility to the business, and we know that that has a direct impact on people's day-to-day lives. So, like, we have to be able to meet people halfway, you know, get off our high horse and start having meaningful conversations in a way that everyone can understand. So people, like, we don't have to have those issues. I can tell, like, it's crazy, man. Like the amount of incidents that I've worked where it was like minutes away from a hospital going down, minutes away from, like, ambulances not being able to get sent out. Like, we can't do this anymore, right? And we have to, like, please, even if you don't take this model and you think I'm an idiot, that's totally fine. Most people do. Just take away that you need to make an attempt to do something like this, because we really need to, like, security is part of our life, and we're all intertwined on this digital ecosystem, whether we like it or not. And if we don't do this, we're gonna make the same mistakes, and they're gonna figure out a new ransomware way for the world to burn to the ground. That's all I had for you. I can take questions if you have any. Otherwise, I can give you another example of why tools necessarily aren't why we may be going down the path again. When we just, yeah, please.
So I come from an environment that sometimes it's difficult to get buy-in because maybe you've already burnt that bridge. You know what I'm saying? So how do you repair that?
Well, it's just like, I mean, this is the people part. You know, the people behind the technology are the most important piece, right? Like it is the people behind it. So how do you go about repairing it depending on the situation? I don't know. I mean, like, I'm not a mental health professional, but I think like owning up to it, like there's the expression extending an olive branch is persisted for thousands of years for how many reasons? Maybe you just go out, bring them a coffee or something like that, and just, you know, shoot the shit for a few minutes and just say, hey, you want to hear something cool? And then have that open dialogue. A little bit about security. I don't know how you go about repairing information, but I definitely know that talking down to them is not the way. Bringing something down to say, hey, I thought this was really interesting that you might be interested in. Shameless plug, on Tuesday, I'm releasing a blog on this piece of malware that I just got done tearing apart. This one is called Ultra Killer. You could use this. If you have a bad relationship, use this, let me know. Slide it in my DMs on LinkedIn or Twitter and let me know how it goes. Use this and just say, so this piece of malware is able to obtain kernel level permissions through a vulnerable driver, and it basically goes through and enumerates all of your endpoint security tools and kills all the processes, right? And then it sets up a backdoor, dumps credentials, does all this stuff, and everyone's in the blind. It works against Defender, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, and Symantec antivirus. Use that and just talk to them about why you need a detection strategy and align it with the goals and the objectives example I have, and let me know how that goes.
Hey, John, I appreciate this conversation.
Good.
Good to see you. And I was very ineffective at this early in my career, which is why this resonates with me a lot, because I had a hard time justifying security spend in these scenarios. I'm now on the other side of the table and helping CISOs do the same thing with their boards on the insurance side, right? One of the things that I've run into recently with CISOs is that they've gotten into the habit now of saying, I don't want to do phishing testing because we know everybody falls for phishing, and instead we focus on the controls. Now, the insurance markets aren't quite, you know, hyped to that right now. They still want you to do phishing testing. I'm just curious from your own perspective, have you felt much, because you mentioned this just a few slides ago, that instead of worrying about, you know, this, you know, John from accounting clicking on a phishing link, that rather we focus on having all the appropriate detections and defense and depth to prevent it, rather than focusing on, like, we need to fix the point of entry as opposed to we need to fix it when we notice that something bad is actually happening?
Are you asking whether or not phishing tests are still valuable nowadays?
Yeah, in terms of, are you seeing a shift in the industry from that?
Yes, I am. I do think that most phishing tests are to check a box at now point. I would like to see, and I do see this happening in some of the more mature organizations, where it turns into an objective-based test that involves a phish, and then use it as a mechanism to highlight someone doing good. So instead of focusing on the click rate, they focus on the report rate. And they're like, okay, people are going to click. We got it. We've known that. We've known that forever. How many people are going to report it? We don't know. Okay, well, how many people report it? And if they report it, they get a $10 gift card to Starbucks. Or we give them a shout out, right? I think that I have seen that happen. I do think that works really, really well. And it's a good message to higher ups of like how we're turning all of our people into sensors. Doug.
Yeah, I think along the same lines. The insurance companies are behind. The regulatory compliance things are all behind. And we're doing check boxes, like resetting passwords. If you got a good MFA, you know, having an expiring password isn't really necessary anymore. But every insurance company in the world says you have to expire it, every regulatory. How do we help them? And this is, again, along your topic here. How do we communicate with insurance companies and the regulators?
Oh, Dougie, great question. And I didn't even plant this on him.
I'll take the $50.
How many business deals or how much conversation or how much can you influence policy and industry across executives through your executive? A ton, right? And if you arm your CEO, who's golfing with the CEO of Bob's Insurance, I'm not going to say an actual insurance provider name, but like Bob's Insurance, and you just say, hey, you know what, like things are kind of changing, you know, and you're asking us if I'm passwordless, why do I have to reset passwords, right, to get approved for this? Or use a YubiKey or something along those lines. You use your executives as a communication channel to influence policy. I mean, like, especially in the United States, like there's a direct line between the higher levels of business and the government and in the insurance industry and everything will cross that line, right? If you have $11 billion, you can say, well, you know what? I'm going to go with Jeff's Insurance because they don't make me do that. I bet you Bob's Insurance quickly changes their policy. But we got to get our executives on board first.
This was a great talk. Are you going to be around for more questions?
I'm here all day.
Awesome. There are cookies in the food area in the event center. So we want to get cookies. Give it up one more time for John. And I'll say one thing, I learned a lot because although this happened in 1997, when I stood up in my first ever meeting with a CEO and the president of a company, and I was the security director, and I said, because we were working on this project and I'd been there for all of a month, and they wouldn't even listen to me. And I stood up and I went, you're both fucking morons, and I walked out of the room. So that's an example of not how to do it. So yes, I learned.